welcome to my booktube channel. I'm Adrienne. This is my new mug. Happy New Year. It has a cat. The book we are reading today is Subjects of Empires, Citizens of States, Yemenis in Djibouti and Ethiopia by Samson Bezabeh. So these days you can see in the news everything is coming in together. We are no longer in this, oh my gosh, you're sponsored by the Cold War dynamic. Different knowledge blocks are not separated. We need all the knowledge from all the eons to become better versions of ourselves. Certain people are coming under attack and they were sponsored by the state to come here, and I just find it very ironic and sad at the same time. So this is for people who don't really know the Horn of Africa. I also have a 9-series episode on this channel if you want to check it out. I was reading about Ethiopian socialist uprisings. Okay. Pre-colonial movement. In the pre-colonial period, the coastal region of the Horn of Africa, where present-day Djibouti is located, was connected to the Ethiopian hinterland by caravan trade routes, linking the sea with major cities in the interior. The ports of Zela and Berbera were key starting points for caravan trade routes. Moving in an easterly direction, the caravans connected the ports with eastern and southwestern Ethiopia. The city of Harar was a major point along the interior caravan route. Other caravan routes started from the coastal town of Massawa in present-day Eritrea, connecting the port with northern and central Ethiopia. In the pre-colonial period movement from ports into the interior, we're going to the interiors, y'all, was not completely free, permitting a comparison between this period and the colonial era. So there's this idea that, once you go somewhere that's not 21st century, you can go wherever because, we don't like the man. But actually, the man also had ancestors who were doing similar things like the man. So the sea was also a very tumultuous limiting factor. Arab boats traveled on the Red Sea only during the day, as there were hazards, including rocky shores. As in other parts of the Indian Ocean, seafarers relied on the monsoon winds that for centuries, if not millennia, powered vessels crossing the Indian Ocean. Major W. Cornwallis Harris, on a visit to the port in Berbera, noted the temporal nature of the port activity because of the monsoon winds. The port was deserted between October and March now, as the monsoon winds did not reach the region. 1844. This is his account. The port space of this region, however, was not only structured or regulated by the natural force of the ocean and the underlying structures of the space. The ports were managed by the Amir al-Bahar, commander of the maritime frontier, a system that had existed for many centuries. Several pre-colonial European travelers were subject to regulations enforced by the Amir al-Bahar or other local authorities who were in control of the port spaces, to which the Amir al-Bahar answered. The first French travelers to the regions, de la Merville and de Chamblore, mentioned the Amir at the port of Mocha when they attempted to travel to the coast of Tajura in present-day Djibouti. Arnauld de Abadi came to Djibouti at the beginning of the 19th century. He wrote of being denied access to the port of Tajura by one of the local rulers of the time. The hinterland caravan trade routes were also structured spaces, each section of a route controlled by the ethnic group that inhabited the area. Along the traditional caravan routes that connected Djibouti to the interior, Afar and Somali ethnic groups controlled different sections, and moving between Afar and Somali-controlled zones was not an easy affair. Traveler Borelli informs us that travelers had to change their guide when switching between the two zones because escorting people in zones outside of one's own region could trigger outright conflict. These hinterland trade routes were also highly securitized by the authorities who controlled the port spaces to which they were linked. The Sultan of Tajura's son, for example, maintained an extended network of informants to ensure that their father was constantly informed of events that could affect trade and security. Major cities, both along the coast in the hinterland. Along the coast and in the hinterland. So towards Ethiopia is the hinterland. Towards the coast is Djibouti. That's the Dummy's Guide to the Horn of Africa. The port of Zayla, built in the shape of a parallelogram, was a gated city where people were instructed to wear their weapons under their clothes. I tried to carry a kitchen knife around this place, but I just ended up dropping it. That is not my forte. The major interport area of Harar was also a gated city where the coming and going of foreigners was controlled. Burton, for example, notes that at the time of his arrival, a dozen petty Arab peddlers were barred from entering the city. Monopoly, as Ranveer Brar said in his latest winter special chicken recipe video. Go watch that, guys. Starting from the end of the 19th century, the local authorities of gated cities such as Harar gave way to colonial power. In Djibouti and its hinterland, colonialism led to the demise of the trade route system. This was caused by the construction of a railway connecting the port of Djibouti with Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, established by Emperor Menelik in 1886. Harar's economic importance fell, while Dire Dawa became a key trading city. The railway lines were faster and more reliable than the old caravans. Within a short time, traffic was drawn to the newly built areas. Diasporic groups, including Yemenis, traveled by train to the interior. Yemenis in trains! It was not just the pattern and direction of mobility that changed, but also the way that movement was governed, as is discussed in the remaining pages. Seascapes and movement during the colonial period. The French arrived with their own notions and quickly changed the navigation practices in the Gulf of Aden. In the earliest period of colonization, one of the first acts by the French was to divide, name, and effectively appropriate the seascapes and port towns. In Obak, one of the first areas colonized, now named the port of Obak, was divided into three banks: Le Banc de Courrieux, Le Banc de Clocheterie, and Le Banc du Secours. They were designated two ports, Southport and Northport, kind of like Paris. Southgate, Northgate. In addition to being named and divided, port spaces were also incorporated in the symbolic regime of maritime law. In Obak, administrators installed a red light for guiding ships coming from the direction of Ras Eber. The Banc de Surcouf came to be indicated by a red rubber ring, while they placed a black ring to indicate the Banc de Clocheterie. The port was also lit up by three lighthouses. At night, two lighthouses glowed red, while the other one had a green beam for guiding ships traveling in the dark. In addition to using new technologies, the administrators of French people required ships sailing in the area to display a specific symbol to aid in their identification. In 1884, the French passed a decree that made it illegal for vessels to sail without appropriate identification. This decree detailed for the first time the rules of navigation both in France and its overseas territories. The regulation distinguished between traditional vessels and those powered by steam engines and specified in detail the symbols and lights that must be used at night. This regulation made it mandatory for boat owners to display a signal that indicated the direction in which the boat was traveling. In case of emergency, the law also required ships to indicate the hazard by sounding a specific alarm, such as a siren in the case of steamships and bells and drums in the case of smaller traditional boats. To enforce the decree, a law stipulating various penalties was passed on March 10, 1891. Regularized port spaces. The arrival of the French saw the regulation not only of vessel traffic but also of the port itself. The space was measured and limiting and defining of what was and not port space. These efforts to measure had kept the port relatively open and unbounded. In the specific case of Djibouti, these changes were institutionalized through the arrêté of November 14, 1889. The order was aimed at fixing and limiting the port of Djibouti and explicitly prescribed the area where boarding and deboarding was allowed. Articles orders that all disembarkment and embarkment could be made only at the quay established in the harbor and the surrounding water. The article goes on to specify the depth of the water. These regulations were fixed throughout the ages up till 1943. As port spaces became limited through specific measurement of the area, access to the spaces also became regulated. Order 297, published in the Journal of Official French Territories, was the chief instrument used to regulate port spaces. Small vessels carrying passengers could not leave the port before 6 o'clock in the morning. The same article forbade the movement of vessels after 8 o'clock in the evening. The only exemptions were for government vessels in possession of a special pass. I waited for hours in the Djibouti airport because of COVID. And yeah, it is not a pleasant experience to be in this space, especially as a non-French speaking person. Violation of the arrêté was punishable by 5 days in prison and a fine ranging from 1 to 15 francs. This is pre-Euro. These rules affected Yemenis living in the region. They had to follow the various regulations, including signposting. Yemenis had to deal on a daily basis with the changes introduced by the colonial rulers. The spreading French control meant that Yemenis were now living under a regime that did not always support their interests. Dang. The Yemeni community wrote 2 letters to the head of the Chamber of Commerce, Paul Morel. The first letter detailed the problems they faced by the Askari, who had the right to board and inspect vessels. The letter, written by those aboard, claimed that money found on the vessel had been confiscated by the agents of the state. After attempting to recover the money, only a small portion of the total sum had been returned. Corruption. In the letter to the Yemenis, characterizing themselves as ignorant foreigners who did not have knowledge of the law, implored Morel to intervene so that they could get their money back. The second letter, written on July 28, 1917, had to do with the problem Yemeni dhow owners faced as a result of the regulation of time in port spaces. It was also addressed to the head of Chamber of Commerce. We, the undersigned owners of the dhows that set sail at Djibouti, have the honor of bringing the following to your attention. As a result of the very marked decline of this area, we find ourselves obliged to wait either at the end of the pier or in the harbor with the rising tide until we can maneuver our dhows. And as the flood tide comes only after 6 o'clock in the evening, it forbids us from entering or exiting the harbor after 6 o'clock in the evening. Our dhows are forced to stay where they are indefinitely and cannot move on pain of a fine. Thus, recently, 2 of us were heavily fined because, benefiting from the rising tide after 6 o'clock in the evening, one had tried to move his dhow into the harbor and the other had tried to move his out loaded to the end of the pier in order to set sail the following morning. We would be grateful, sir, if you would ask the honorable governor to authorize us on the very particular matter to allow us to maneuver our dhow. We thank you in advance and are honored, sir, to send you our greetings, dhow owners. The regulation of port spaces and time indeed had direct effect on Yemenis using the port spaces. The regime of control was established by the authorities, however, not limited to those already mentioned. In fact, one can say the limited space and time of the port space acted as a framework for those focused on the movement of people in Djibouti. Under the French, people traveling into the areas were required to have a health certificate and to pass through quarantine centers. Those who failed to do so were detained in the health centers, something that had never occurred during pre-colonial times. It was for this purpose of checking and detaining unhealthy people that zone of quarantines were established. The colonial authorities built a hospital police center in Djibouti known as Police Sanitaire Maritime Lazare. It was under the control of a member of the medical staff. A native sanitary agent worked with the chief medical officer. The Police Sanitaire Maritime, I don't speak French, was responsible for inspecting warships and postal vessels. Although not on a daily basis, this body was also mandated to investigate other kinds of ships. The arrival of people into the territory was also an issue. In addition to creating the port police, the colonial authorities passed decrees relating to immigration. While mobility was regulated in the pre-colonial period, this was a more formal and more intrusive form of control. 1903, earliest orders on immigration states that an individual cannot be received by the protectorate unless he is the owner of an establishment or employed by an establishment. It further states that an employed person must show proof of a formal contract. If the immigrant did not have a contract, he needed to prove that he had 200 francs. Cash. The French colonial power, or bank, I guess. Banks? Did they exist? Anyways. They sought to better control the territories and inland regions. The French established a prison in Obak staffed by Sudanese and Senegalese soldiers. Later, through a decree passed in 1900, they formed an urban police force and organized a native service composed of native agents who worked as a police force. Besides the native service, 1901, the colonial authorities created a rural police force, the primary purpose of which was to protect the railway. This force manned 8 posts along the train line. At each post, 19, 27, 37, 52, 56, 70, 75, and 90 kilometers respectively, staff included 1 brigadier and a number of police. This arrangement, as well, was unlike the pre-colonial traditional system. Caravan routes before the establishment of the train line operated under a system of localized control. There were always authorities who watched over the area and the movement of people within it. The caravan within itself, hierarchically organized and traveled from Afar to Isa-controlled zones, required knowledge of the terrain and the people. The French system brought control to the new railway line. This further curtailment of people's freedom of movement presented a challenge to Yemenis who wanted to move from the coast to the hinterland. They were not welcomed by Yemenis, bringing new challenges to their lives in Djibouti. And then the Indians and Yemeni Arabs had to write protest letters to the administrators because they had to sit at the 3rd-class train section with all the other people, and they didn't like that. So remember your rights, guys. This is archived, so that is how we know about it. If nobody writes stuff, then we wouldn't know about it. Education, y'all. There was a huge bird, but it flew away. Birds are coming back. Are you a 3rd-class train citizen, ticket purchaser, state of the colonial citizen of this empire?